Hey guys, it's Roderick, and I'm here with your review of Fellow Travelers, Season 1, Episode 7, White Knight. So this is our penultimate episode. The penultimate episode is the second to last episode in a series. And the goal of the penultimate episode is to really bring into focus our antagonist's journey, the journey of our protagonist, and really bring in really kind of start to see where all the storylines are going to intersect, right? So it sets us up for our ultimate episode where we really get to see the culmination of all these storylines, where they intersect, how they play out, and really kind of act as kind of the climax. If you would have like a 3-act structure film, kind of acts as almost that climax before we get to our resolving point in the ultimate episode that either resolves all the issues if it's a series finale, or resolves a certain set of issues and sets us up for a next set of issues if there's going to be another season, right? So the way you judge a penultimate episode is, you ask, at this point you should be able to answer, whose journey is it? Who went through the most change? Who created the most change? Are storylines intersecting, right? And typically, when I review other television shows, I can clearly say, check these boxes. But for some, well, not for some reason, I kind of know why. This penultimate episode really did not feel like a penultimate episode, right? Because of the fact that even though this was the only episode where there was the flashback, so the narratives really flowed really well, we only know that this is going to be that this is a second to last episode because we're looking at Showtime and we know this is episode 7 and then we know that episode 8 is our last episode. So in that regards, it really didn't kind of give us that kind of what's going to happen or whatever. I mean, towards the end, you could possibly say that, but I mean, it didn't get to hit you like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? Now, many of us can probably surmise what's going to happen in this next episode, but all the way, I can't really say that detracted from this episode because the journey was worth it. Because when I tell you this episode, it gave me just about everything, it did. So I'm going to reserve judgment on it, and we're kind of critiquing this episode kind of for the job it was set forth until we get to the last episode, because then I'll be able to kind of give my thoughts for the whole series, right? So that's pretty much kind of, and one of the themes of this episode was the fact that there are two things that were very pertinent. It was acceptance and it was community, right? Who's a part of the community, who's not feeling part of their community, how people create their own communities, and also acceptance. Every character, Hawk, Tim, Marcus, Frankie, even Jerome, even Lucy, even Kimberly, had to come to some level of acceptance about the things and changes in their life. I really thought that was really great because the fact of acceptance can happen on different levels. Either you are forced to accept some things or you can choose to gradually get to that level of acceptance, right? So without further ado, let's get into the episode. So we're now starting at a flash forward, starting in 1978. And we start off with the death of Harvey Milk, who was a city councilman in San Francisco who was brutally murdered by the city manager, Dan White, who then started the Twinkie defense. If you're not familiar with the Twinkie defense, I won't go into it. It was hilarious because, not really hilarious, but it was interesting because when I was in law school, it was one of the defenses we learned about in law school as far as the defense of a intentional crime that mitigates the intentionality of the crime. So anyway, for your pleasure, you can Google the Twinkie defense, and that could be your horrible pastime, and see exactly how they were able to assert the Twinkie defense and bringing his first-degree murder charge all the way down to his manslaughter charge. So anyway, Tim is now in San Francisco with Frankie. They're both social workers, and Tim has this postcard from Fire Island, and here comes Frankie being like, girl, I know you're not thinking about going to see him. And I was like, good on you, Frankie. Good on you. I'm glad you finally stood up and decided that we're not going to be part of the walk all over me crew. And Tim's like, he needs me, he's going through a tough time. And I'm like, oh no, poor Jackson. And then all of a sudden he was like, And then all of a sudden Tim fires back and was just like, you know what? Since we talk about each other's tea, what was your situation with Marcus? And then Frankie's like, well, at least he sleeps in my bed most of the time. And I was like, oh, Frankie, you done eliminated all the goodwill I was going to give you because you still fucking around with fuckboy Marcus or whatever, right? Now Lucy is pregnant. Now Lucy is with her daughter Kimberly, who she wasn't pregnant, who is pregnant. And she's sitting in her office, and Kimberly girl, she was like sitting there. Lucy's looking like, stuff for the nursery. And child, Tim calls the house. I was like, oh, so side chicks were really bold back in 1978. So he's like, Kimberly answers the phone. It's like, it's Tim Laughlin. And Lucy is like, I know this motherfucker ain't got no nerve to be calling up my house. So Lucy picks up the phone and gives her the daughter the get the fuck up out the room eyes, right? And she's like, she didn't even say hello. She just says, how are you? She's like, yes. She was like, look, I'm calling. She's like, Hawk's not here. He's like, I'm just calling to let you know he's calling me drunk at night. He really, he's in trouble. I don't want to, I think he wants to see me. And she's like, bitch, are you asking permission for my husband to go fuck off on you? And he's like, I kind of am. I'm trying to be high-key respectful of this whole situation here. And then Lucy pauses, and she was like, well, if, because at this point we find out Hawk has been drinking. He's left the house. And she's like, he's in trouble, right? And then she hangs up the phone, and girl, Kimberly is outside. She's not only she's ear hustling, she is like around the corner in the sideline, like really Inspector Gadgeting this whole situation. And I was like, child, just stay out of grown folks' business. But whatever, right? So now we start off with Hawk, who is in Fire Island, and he has the party board starter kit. He got Coke, he got vodka, he got poppers, right? And he's just doing everything, giving you a good 1978, porno kind of tease. He's getting a blowjob. This curly hair twink gets up. And I was like, okay, Hawk, but we find out that Hawk can't even get it up, right? And I was like, okay. So then finally Tim shows up, giving you lumberjack masculine tease. And the gays, he's living with like 3 other gays. I'll call them collectively the hyenas or whatever. And then most of them, except for this one, which we'll call him Rent Boy for now, then his name's going to change in a second later on. But Rent Boy is like, oh, did you just come from the meat rack? You giving a butch tease? And they just really are putting Tim through it. And then Hawk comes back and is like, don't mind these hyenas or whatever. But Craig immediately, Craig is the curly hair twink who we're calling Rent Boy. He immediately stands by Hawk to let Tim know, I'm sorry, he's like, I'm sorry, but I'm his new boo now, whatever. And Tim is like, okay, bitch, whatever, right? So the hyenas give Tim the rules. Don't be asking people's last names. Don't be asking what they do for a living. And Fire Island in the 1970s was really this gay paradise of where gays, from New York City and the Northeast could go and just really enjoy a secluded gay time. Like, I actually have never been to Fire Island. I've been to Provincetown, which I really like. I've been to Key West, but I've never been to Fire Island. And one day I probably will go. I haven't gone because I didn't want to go. It's just time, issues, whatever, right? So anyway, it's, I really do enjoy those kind of gay male only kind of, enclaves or whatever like that. So then, Hawk goes on, is like, I don't really like the word gay because you can't use the word gay around Hawk. He prefers homosexual because he's a man and he's sexual. And Tim is like, homosexual is a clinical definition. I prefer gay. He's like, rah, rah on gay. And once again, we just see the kind of like identity disassociation Hawk has between him accepting himself as a gay man versus the sexual acts he does, right? So I was like, okay, Hawk ain't really made that much preference, right? So then Hawk excuses himself and he goes to the bathroom, and then Tim goes looking because the other little Latina hyena is like, he needs some help. I'm glad you're here. Maybe he needs a doctor because he has gastritis from all his alcohol abuse, right? So that's the inflammation of your intestines from the causes vomiting and stomach pain from all this drinking. So he's just been drinking himself into oblivion because it's only been 6 months since Jackson died, right? And I was like, oh, Lord. And then Rent Boy is like, don't come trying to play Captain Save-A-Ho with my man because he really don't need you. I'm all he needs or whatever. And I was just like, And at this point, I was like, I feel like we could have used some time between 1968 to 1978 to kind of see the time, to see Jackson, to see Hawk's relationship, to see how that worked. I would have rather focused on that than some of the other things that the show focused on. Obviously, you have some time. Like, I feel like we could have cut some Harvey Milk time out in the 50s to give us some Jackson and Hawk time in these later episodes, because there's such a important thing that happens. We just know, we see Jackson as a kid, he thinks he's trouble, and then we find out he's died. And I just feel like that's such an important thing that they should have shown us, as opposed to using exposition as they use later on in the show to kind of tell us, fill us in and when something happened, right? So anyway, then we also find out that Craig is Hawk's connect, right? Craig is the one who's giving the drugs or whatever like that. Now we see Marcus, who's now teaching journalism, and I'm just like, okay, Marcus, so finally you done made it to San Francisco University, you're teaching journalism, and we get that perfunctory, rudimentary kind of, college students debating about the high level things that's going on. And I'm just so over Marcus at this point. I was just like, whatever, because Marcus is the professor in the class. We see Jerome, who we now know is going to be living with Marcus and Frankie because we met him in 1982. And, some straight person starts talking about queers and how, Dan White was a hero and a veteran. And it's kind of like this very surfacey, bigoted thing. But, class ends and Jerome kind of goes up to Marcus and be like, why didn't you say anything? Because Jerome gets into it with the student. And he's like, why didn't you say anything? You're middle-aged, single, you live in the Castro. And Marcus is like, this conversation is inappropriate. Since we talk about stuff, how come you still have your same clothes? How's your home life? Because you kind of stink. And Jerome's like, this conversation is inappropriate. So we see that Marcus is still on the fuckboy shit that Hawk is still on, right? Both of them still unable to kind of like accept who they are. Now, Hawk is at the beach and he goes swimming. I was like, Lord Jesus, please don't let this man like try to unalive himself in the ocean or get caught up by a current or something like that. But anyway, Tim is out there, they're talking. And then, I was just like, okay, cute, right? Now, Kimberly is holding a picture of Jackson, right? As Lucy comes in and she acts like, who's Tim Laughlin? And Lucy's like, bitch, you better mind your motherfucking business and stay out of grown people's business. And then she's like, well, Jackson told me that there once was a guy who was in our family shed, who was dad's special friend. And I was just like, Lucy's like, girl, I can barely get up in the morning. I can barely take a shower. Your daddy ain't here to help you with this baby. You just count your prayers. I'm not fucking drowning myself in vodka every morning dealing with this shit. So you need to mind your own motherfucking business. And I was like, for once, I was on Lucy's side, girl. Like, girl, just stay out of grown folks' business. Your daddy loves you. Let them work it out, right? So anyway, back at the beach, Tim is out there. We find that the Hawk is taking a sabbatical from the State Department. But he said he's glad he's there or whatever like that, right? And then Hawk is like, he's like, well, I have a business proposal for you later, right? I'll cook you dinner. I'll do whatever. And Tim was like, what kind of business proposal? I was like, what kind of business proposal too? Because anything Hawk ever offers is typically never, ever a good thing, right? So I was like, okay, fine. So then they go playing on the beach. They're running. And I was like, girl, this ain't gonna last. This ain't gonna last. But have your beaches moment. Like, it totally gave me Beaches with Bette Midler, Barbara Hershey. And I was like, girl, we're gonna be singing Wind Beneath Our Wings by the end of this episode, because that's exactly what this episode was giving me, right? Now, so anyway, they didn't go running for a jog, and Hawks takes him to this cruising spot. And one of the things I like about this scene, besides the obvious like cruising spot and the overt homosexuality, is it kind of gave you a very much Garden of Eden kind of presence, right? You had the lush bushes, you had the naked men, and it really just, and Hawk was like, no talking, like in church. It was very, very reverent of the space. And regardless of whether or not what side you fall on gaming, cruising, and cruising spots, the art of cruising is something that I think every gay man needs to know. Now, just to be clear, cruising does not mean actually having sex in public places, but the ability to connect and entice and meet a gay man just based upon nothing but your looks, your eyes, and your ways, right? We're now in a time of like everyone has apps and grinders and texts, and if you try to go out to the gay bar, which are now becoming a relic, most gay men who are in their 20s don't know how to cruise and don't know how to meet other gay men, right? They don't know how to engage other gay men, even if it's just not on a friendly level, without a phone, without a text. And that is something that back in the 70s, back in the 80s, and in the 90s, before the apps, if you didn't know how to cruise, if you didn't know how to meet another gay man, you were going home hungry, horny, and whatever, because you couldn't meet nobody, right? So the art of cruising is something I think that all gay men need to know how to do. Like, it should be part of the gay Hogwarts, whatever. Like potions, like transfiguration, cruising would be one of the basic courses in the gay Hogwarts if there was one, right? Anyway, We just see it, and they're just giving us full frontal. And I was like, Showtime is always going to give us a good little full frontal. So I was like, okay, girl, whatever. Meanwhile, Frankie is trying to get him some dick with Marcus, and Marcus ain't paying attention. And Frankie then gets mad. It's like, where are you? You're not here. And come to find out, Marcus done cheated on Frankie. Surprise. Frankie done stayed with Marcus after he cheated. Surprise. Right? And I was just like, Mark, Frankie, I don't even feel bad for you or whatever. And then finally he's like, ain't you back to smoking? If you I can deal with you going to the baths, but if you fuck around. And I was like, girl, why are you wasting your breath? But then Marcus comes clean about how, he had this interaction with his class, with this young guy he thinks is gay. He feels like shit. And Frankie is just like, it's just the same shit with you all the time, right? And Frankie is like, I'm feeling disrespected. He was like, and I'm like, you let this man disrespect you. Ain't this what you asked for? Ain't this what you've been begging for, to have a house with a bathtub so you can be able to this motherfucker anyway? Knowing that he's closeted, knowing he has issues. So this is exactly what you deserve. Once again, no sympathy for Frankie at all. While the plot, and this whole storyline runs so parallel and so similar to Hawk and Tim's. What's the difference? Is it supposed to be that because they're both black, that somehow their experiences are going to be the same, and that's kind of the moral of the story, is that regardless of your race or socioeconomic background or whatever you try to do, being in a closet and dealing with being in a closet, loving someone closeted at that time, at any point, is difficult? If that is going to be the moral, if that's what they're trying to say with that, they have failed, right? Because the Frankie and Marcus storyline just becomes a nuisance, because especially when it's just juxtaposed against Hawk and Tim's, because we're just seeing the same behavior, the same thing. Tim and Frankie, Hawk and Marcus, without any kind of delineation at all. And I'm just like, there's nothing interesting about them, right? Like, they both have this silly, with some tweaks, they could be the same person. So I just don't understand what is the purpose of this B storyline, because it is the B storyline, right? But it's not different. It's not compelling. I just, the wigs are better this year, 1978. But again, and I feel like, I'm going to save it to the end, because I'm just going to wait. But for those of you who watch my Handmaid's Tales videos, I smell some Luke-ish. And that's all I'm going to say, right? So anyway, now we get to the scene where, like, Tim and Hawk are having dinner, and we have this kind of thinly disguised exposition again. Exposition is where one character kind of downloads information to another character, and what you want to try to do with exposition is always kind of disguise it, right? Instead of like, this is what you need to know, this is what happened. So in this scene, which I have to say is one of the most perfectly crafted scenes, I think, of the entire series so far in episode 7, because the characters start at one point and they end at a total opposite point, and that is the definition of a perfectly crafted scene, where characters start at one point and they end at an opposite point, and the way and the kind of the dialogue and the flow of the episode, you don't really think about the exposition that's being downloaded, because there's so much conflict, right? So we start off, and Tim is disguised. So we have this disguised exposition. We find out that, Tim was in prison for 1.5 years. He followed Frankie and Marcus to San Francisco. Tim is completely out the closet. He came out to his family. He's living his life as an out gay man. He's happy. And then he was just like, Tim calls out Craig, being like, I don't know about Craig. Hawk's like, oh, girl, don't worry about it. You just jealous. And then we get another piece of exposition where Hawk recalls how he ruined Kimberly's baby shower by topping over, the cake or something like that, right? And Hawk is just like, you could stay. We could just start over again. We could live this whole life. And I was like, bitch, you got a whole ass family with a whole ass daughter with a grandchild coming away. You can't hide in Fire Island all the time, right? And then he tries to kiss Tim, and Tim's like, I'm seeing somebody. His name's Arthur. He's a poet. And Hawk, starts to laugh, whatever like that, right? And then all of a sudden, Tim's like, okay, so what's this business proposition, right? That just come on and lay it on me. He's like, well, I'm gonna put this house in your name. This could be like this could be your place. I know you're poor as a social worker. You ain't got no assets. And this could be our little place, and we could come and hang out and every once in a time a year. And Tim's like, okay. And then all of a sudden, Tim's like, what? You just doing this to hide this house from your family. You're just doing this so that way you can still live your happy heterosexual life, put this name, put this house in my name, so that you can come and fool Allah and fuck off on me twice a year, a couple of times a year, when I done told you I got a whole ass man. Like, I was so proud of Tim. He was like, girl, bye. So then Tim does a classic fuckboy switch around, right? So the classic fuckboy switch around is when you've been caught, once again, being lying, being deceitful, being manipulative, being selfish, and turns it around on Tim and says, well, you know what? You're such a judgmental bore, and I'm so glad I didn't have to deal with you, whatever. And I was just like, Tim, don't fall for this. This is the fuckboy okie doke, right? Instead of him being like, yeah, you're right, I'm wrong, whatever, he turns this around on Tim, because that's how, so then Tim can start feeling bad, right? And I was just like, girl, okay, whatever. Now we get the coverage. So we have the coverage of the Dana White trial continues. Tim is getting ready to leave because Tim's like, you know what? I didn't come here with this my good old Pan Am miles to fly to Fire Island to deal with all your shenanigans, right? And then he hears there's a party outside. So the girls are already partying. Like, that's what happens in like party houses, in Fire Island. They're out there, they're doing the yayo, whatever. And then Hawk's like, you're leaving? And then Tim looks, I was like, no, this bitch ain't leaving. He about to stay. So then finally, Latino Hyena grabs his bag, and Tim starts to partake in the party favors. And he starts having shots. He starts doing coke. And girl, we find out, so I was like, oh, good for Tim. So then Tim catches Craig / Rent Boy, now gonna be known as Alexis Carrington. Even though typically Alexis was Blake's first wife, and Crystal was a second wife, Craig is just giving you all Alexis Carrington teas because Alexis was the nicer of the two characters. So now Craig, Rent Boy, is going to be referred to as Alexis. So Alexis is giving you what I just want to look at him. He's like, why? He's like, I'm going to tell him you stealing from you. Craig's like, I ain't stealing from him. I don't need his motherfucking money. I'm the one who gives him drugs and gives him the control of and kind of doses him out, because otherwise he would just go too heavy or whatever like that. And I was like, oh, girl. So now Tim is down there indulging, and Alexis is not happy. She is just like, I thought we are getting rid of Crystal and whatever like that. And I'm just keying because I know this is going to end up badly, right? So on the surface, it's like, okay, we see like this is good. Tim is indulging. But what this really is once again Hawk manipulating Tim into thinking that he's the problem, and Tim is making the sacrifices. Tim is making the changes. Hawk is so selfish, he never has to make any type of sacrifices, any type of changes, because all he does is guilt the people in his life into acquiescing to whatever selfish activity he has, right? And so, yeah, on the surface, it's great that Tim is doing it, but he knew that Tim was probably not going to leave, and pretty much gave that as an alternative, like, bitch, if you want to stay in this house and fool Allah with us, you better be down with the program. So whatever, right? So later they go to a tea dance. So a tea dance is a gay dance party that happens during the day, typically on a Sunday afternoon between like 12 and 4 or whatever. So that's a tea dance. The reason where that originated from is like on Fire Island, right? And Tim is on is in full-blown party mode. He's like, taking drugs to Hawk. They're doing their little dance. And Alexis, Rent Boy Carrington, is not having it. He is side-eyeing them. And and it was so great because this is where music really comes to kind of add more flavor to the scene, because Ashford and Simpson's Found a Cure is playing. And for this moment, for this second, you could truly believe that Hawk believes that he has found his cure to what's ailing him with his situation with the grief of his son, right? So I was like, but child, that is shortly lived, because Alexis Rent Boy Carrington throws himself right in the middle and scooches Tim right on out. And I was like, oh no, Tim, that man will put you through way too much to have Alexis Rent Boy Carrington scoot you out. I would have grabbed the Rent Boy by his hair and moved him back over to the side, right? And I was just like, whatever. And I was like, or if that wasn't the case, I was gonna throw hands at the tea dance, I would have gone and made out with somebody else right next to Hawk or whatever like that, right? Meanwhile, Kimberly is home, snooping through her parents' shit, not minding her business, staying in grown folks' business. She finally finds a key to a locked drawer, where she finds Tim's sympathy card and his business card. And I was like, girl, okay. So now we get back to San Francisco, and Jerome is walking into the gay health center. He needs to see somebody. Secretary Fish, receptionist Fish is on the phone with somebody. Girl, it's Kimberly asking about what this is, what type of clients they do. And finally, she's like, this is a gay lesbian center. Can I help you? I gotta go. I got people to do. I got things to do. And hangs up with Kimberly, and she's like, dun, dun, dun. And I was like, girl, just stay out of people's business. Now, meanwhile, Tim is still high back at the tea dance or whatever, by himself, you know, and like, which just kind of triggers me because I remember how many times when I was a young gay, being out with my friends, and then my friends, I would turn around because I was on one, and all of a sudden, like, my friends are gone. They left me, but we see all the hyenas like talking, they're whispering. I'm like, child, did Hawk have like an overdose? Child, it's the Harvey Milk case, and Dan White case has come out. They're in manslaughter, and everybody is like, whatever. So Tim gets back to the house, and Hawk is there fooling along with Alexis, Rent Boy Carrington, and Tim is like, you left me at the bar. And Hawk is like, oh, Alexis told me that you went home with somebody else. And Hawk was like, Tim was like, nah, that's not true. And then, you know, Alexis, Rent Boy Carrington's like, oops, my mistake. And then Tim loses it, because I was writing down, Tim, you better throw some hands. He gave you the great, he grabbed motherfucker, they would start doing whatever, and then Hawk is like, oh shit, this about to fuck up my high. So Hawk does what Hawk does always do, is decides that he's gonna throw some dick in the mix. So he's like gonna make some, so he starts to get like a threesome getting ready, right? Which I was like, okay, lemons and lemonade. Like, I mean, that seems like the most acceptable solution to this whole thing. So they get ready to have like, you know, their own little threesome or whatever like that. And I was just like, oh, okay, whatever. Now, back in San Francisco, you know, all the news of the Dan White trials comes up. Marcus shows up to the health center to walk Frankie home. Frankie's like, I'm gonna go protest. And then Marcus is like, nah, I don't wanna do that. You know, you need to go home. This is really for the whites, which I thought was a very interesting way of interjecting race at this point, because all we kind of hear by Marcus's exposition, but not by showing the thing that he's working for black people, but we never really see Marcus doing anything for black people since 1952 or whatever, and that's pretty much it. So then it just seems like a really weird time for him to interject the racial disparities between black gays and white gays. Because the better use of Marcus and Frankie would have been to show them and how they are navigating this new movement and this new wave of gay rights and gay liberation in the 70s as black men, doing and dealing with the disparities that how black gays are treated in the community as opposed to white gays, right? That's the better use of them in this show. But, you know, we're episode 7, so what can we say, right? So anyway, so Frank is like, you know what, I'm tired of your shit. I don't have time for you. He pushes Marcus in front of Jerome, and then Jerome is looking at them kind of like that Kimberly, like, not minding your own business type of thing. And I was like, whoop, I guess the cat's out the bag now, right? So anyway, back at the threesome, they're still making out or whatever, and Alexis Red Boy Carrington gets naked, and we get a full frontal of the nude of the parts, and then he taps his leg like this, is like, you know, we're about to go. And then Hawk is like, come on, girl. So him and Tim, they all go in the room, right? And so this is when you get like a threesome, right? And so if I was Tim in that situation, I would have gone ahead and done the threesome, but I would have given a performance for the gods. After our little threesome situation, there would have been no doubt at all who was the better fuck, who he keeps coming back to, and why he keeps coming back. See, Tim kind of was just all like, I don't know, and maybe that was his first threesome, so you kind of need to get your sea legs, but the mechanics of a threesome are very intricate, even though it looks very simple, right? Because Hawk was not managing this threesome very well, right? Because if he was fucking like Alexis Carrington on the bed, so then Tim needed to either be engaged on the other side, okay, not to be too graphic, but like, you know, the problem is that from Tim's point of view, Alexis Rent Boy Carrington was what's called the necessary evil in a threesome, right? So the necessary evil is the person in the threesome you gotta kind of have to put up with to have sex with the person you want to have sex with, right? So from Alexis Rent Boy Carrington's perspective, Tim is a necessary evil, right? Which makes them perfectly bookends in the threesome, and Hawk is in the middle, right? So if you're going to be a bookend in a threesome, you need to keep yourself busy at all times so that you're not left out in the action, right? Because if Tim really knew what he was doing, he would have like, okay, fine, you do whatever you want to do. I'm going to close out this Grammy-nominated show and show you exactly what this is. But, you know, girls are new, whatever. I just try to expose way too much of my business, but that's what it is, right? So anyway, as Hawk is like, sliding up into Alexis, Rent Boy, Carrington, he looks over and sees the picture of Jackson. And then Tim looks over, he's like, oh shit. And then he's like, what you do? What happened? He's like, I wanted to know him. I wanted to see him. Child, Hawk goes from banging Rent Boy out to choking him out on the bed. And I was like, ooh, this turned quickly, right? So then finally he chokes Rim. He's trying to choke Rent Boy out. Tim pulls him off. Rent Boy's like, fuck this. He leaves naked, butt wet. Tim's laying on the bed, having an emotional breakdown. Dick's still wet from Bussy. And it's just a whole hot ass mess. And who's going to pick up the pieces? Good old Tim. But, girl, that's what Tim does. Back in San Francisco, the LGBT community, at this point there's no QIA, is marching and protesting against the Dan White thing. And so Marcus finds Jerome, who is being hit by police. They end up in a diner, which is exactly this first diner that we saw Tim in, not Tim, but Hawk in, calling Tim. So they're in that same exact diner. And then the police bust out the windows, and then they show up, they start beating people. Marcus jumps on top of Jerome to stop him from being beat or whatever like that. And afterwards, Marcus and Jerome are having a conversation. Well, actually, take this back. This conversation occurs before the beating, where Jerome is like, why are you living on the street? He's like, well, my parents really didn't, accept me as being gay. And then we get Marcus being like, yeah, I wanted to tell my dad before he died. So now we know the reason he ended up in San Francisco is because his dad died, not because he really loved Frankie. Fuck boy. So then, Jerome is like, well, the gays of your generation, y'all just know how to stay in the truth. So then Marcus gives us the fuck boy anthem of, you don't know how hard it is being duplicitous and not making sacrifices and wanting to do right thing and still loving Frankie. Girl, bye, whatever. But then that's when the police bust in and start whooping ass. And then Marcus jumps on top of Jerome and stops him from being beat or whatever like that. Meanwhile, Kimberly is watching old pictures of the family with Jackson, kind of like from that same era where we were last episode. And Lucy says, look, your dad does a lot of shit I don't understand, but like women of our generation, we closed our eyes to things we didn't want to see, or whatever. And Kimberly says that if it's a boy, she wants to name it Jack. Okay, fine, whatever. Back at Fire Island, now we get another exposition scene after he done tried to choke out Alexis, Rent Boy, Carrington. They're sitting there, he's like, you know what? We tried everything to get, Jackson off of heroin, but he would come back. He would go, we try to get him focused on his writing. He wouldn't do it. And so then, Hawk realizes that, his son never drank because his son didn't want to be like him because his son could see through the lies. So we never really get a clear picture as like what was Jackson's problem, right? Like we could surmise maybe he was gay, maybe he just hated his parents, maybe he had some type of mental illness. We don't know, but that is a story, that is a plot point that should have been mined further, right? And I think, again, like I can think of like 17 other things in this show that we could have done without. We could have done with some Jackson times. I think that's very important, right? So then, Tim again is like, look, your family needs you. You need to stop trying to kill yourself. Your family loves you. Even though he may have seen through your lies, your love for him wasn't a lie. And then, of course, Hawk is like, well, don't you need me? And Tim is like, well, I already have you. Okay, Ben, I can just say, at this point, the Wind Beneath Our Wings song is tuning up in the background, right? Because the next day, Tim gets up, he's thinking, okay, he's about to leave. Then he's talking to Latina Hyena, who gives him the worst piece of advice. This is why you don't let random people speak into your life and give you bad advice, because that's what they end up doing. He's like, I know most people will tell you should get over him, and that's probably right, but also it's the stupidest thing in the world. And I would have told Latina Hyena, mind your own business, girl, because you know what? You ain't help, because if you're really on my side, when I showed up, you could have told Alexis to get in her motherfucking lane, right? So anyway, Tim and Latina Hyena get up and come downstairs, and Hawk is here doing his morning lines. Like, he's doing his morning Pop-Tart lines or whatever with the Black Hyena. And so then Latina Hyena says, you know what? I'm going to go outside. Black Hyena stays. I'm like, girl, you were raised better just to be sitting there or whatever like that. And then Tim is like, you know what? It wasn't true. I done wasted my time with you. I am done with you. We're over. Don't call to me. Don't talk to me, whatever. And I was just like, this was not the way I would have wanted you to find out, but you found out, right? So, meanwhile, Tim gets ready to leave, and then Black Queen hands Hawk the straw, and I was like, girl, that's your contribution to the situation? Hawk does another line, then kicks the Black Queen out. And I was just like, girl, you were just in the wrong place, wrong time, right? And then we were like, okay, now good. So now Hawk is finally seeing that there are consequences to his actions. You can't keep jerking people around, throwing them, breadcrumbing them. This is a 1978 version of breadcrumbing. Hawk is breadcrumbing Tim and has been breadcrumbing this man for 2 decades, right? So anyway, we still, Hawk calls home after Tim leaves, and he's like, "Is Kimberly? Hey, Daddy, how are you? I miss you." And Hawk is like, "I'm coming home." Yeah, you're coming home because now, right? Tim is gone. You just with a bunch of leeches in your house, and you were making them pay rent or nothing. So yeah, now vacation's over. It's time you motherfucker come home. I just hope no one watched this scene and really thought that Hawk had some realistic change of heart about what's going on in his life. It's kind of like at the end of that pool scene or whatever, and he's like thinking about, yeah. So it's like that. It's like at the end of the scene where he's looking out at people holding candlelight vigils for Harvey Milk. Do you really think Hawk was moved because of Harvey Milk, or is he moved because he's motherfucking by himself and he has no true community? Right? This is where we talk about the themes of community. Tim had to accept the fact that Hawk is a fuckboy and will always lie to him. Hawk has no community. Tim is trying to build his community. Everyone is talking about their community and factoring it, and Hawk realizes that once again he's by himself, right? So you get back, so now we get our flash forward to 1982. Hawk is going through Tim's things. He's seeing pictures of all the people Tim has lost during the AIDS epidemic, and then he comes across the postcard from Fire Island. So then when Hawk returns to the hospital, the nurse tells him that Tim has had another seizure. It was really bad, but they pulled him out of it. Hawk goes to Tim's room. He sits there, he kisses him on the head, and he kind of waits with him. And that's kind of how the episode ends. And this is where it says it does give us a sense that Tim's time is near, that it's ending. So as far as that part of the penultimate episode, it does kind of check that box, but we never really get the sense of like, this is where things are going to culminate or whatever. Overall, I thought this was another great episode. I loved it. I have a feeling I may get teary and I may cry. I know I've been giving Hawk and Marcus and Frankie the business, but I feel like I may tear up on this last episode, so don't judge me or whatever. I also want to apologize for my last video last week because there were a lot of weird hard cuts, and that's just because my phone was running out of memory and I had to splice them together. So, excuse me, I apologize for that. But don't forget to like, don't forget to subscribe, don't forget to share. Drop that in the comments. Let me know what you thought about this episode because, we have one more episode left. And don't forget, I have a big announcement at the end of the episode 8 review. So, thanks guys. I'll see you later. Bye.